The film opens and our attention is drawn to a young woman. This young woman, purely in search of excitement and thrill, finds herself trapped in a perilous situation, one from which survival appears to be an almost impossible feat. Upon completing her college education, a young woman named Daisy embarks on a journey to a different city, seeking employment. However, instead of taking the straightforward highway, she decides to travel through dense forests and winding mountain roads, all for the sake of adventure. At first, everything seems perfectly normal, but after a short while, the navigation repeatedly starts turning her into different directions. Gradually, Daisy finds herself in an area where there's no road left to continue. Panicked, she attempts to turn back, but the navigation system persistently instructs her to make a U-turn. At this point, the situation becomes such that she can neither proceed forward nor retreat backward. Frustrated by the constant incorrect directions, Daisy eventually gives up on trusting the navigation and begins searching for her way the old-fashioned method by consulting a physical map. Just then, a massive truck abruptly pulls up and stops right in front of her. Daisy was already on high alert because she was all alone, and the place was utterly deserted. The man seated in the truck heard her apprehension, and with great kindness, he began to explain the way on the map. At first glance, he seemed like a helpful person, but then Daisy notices him quietly closing the car door. This action immediately sparks a sense of doubt in Daisy's mind. A little while later, the man begins to forcefully invite Daisy to come to his house. His overly friendly and strange behavior makes Daisy feel terrified deep inside. The moment she firmly rejects him, the man's true, sinister nature is instantly revealed. Suddenly, the entire situation spirals completely out of control, and two men immediately begin to pursue Daisy. Daisy then flees for her very life, exerting every ounce of strength she possesses to escape. She simply cannot comprehend how everything was perfectly normal just a few short minutes ago, and now, without warning, her life is suddenly in grave danger. During his continuous running, his leg got severely injured. The pain is so overwhelming that it becomes incredibly difficult for her to walk. But the distinct sound of footsteps rapidly approaching from behind won't allow her to stop. Just as those two men get dangerously close to her, Daisy suddenly grabs a heavy stone and hurls it directly at them. The moment the stone strikes, their focus is momentarily diverted for a few crucial seconds, and seizing that precious opportunity, Daisy quickly escapes deep into the dense forest. As evening slowly starts to descend, after running for several long hours, Daisy finally arrives at the bank of a small river. She is so utterly overwhelmed by thirst that, without even caring if the water is clean or dirty, she immediately begins to drink it. The dense jungle stretching out before her made her feel completely alone. A palpable fear was clearly visible on her face, yet she continuously tried to gather her courage, reminding herself that she absolutely had to get out of here alive. As night descends, she finds a hidden safe spot within the jungle and settles there. She spends the entire night living in the shadow of fear. However, by good fortune, no attack befalls her throughout that night. With the arrival of dawn, she starts to feel anxious about her wounded leg. To avoid infection, she begins to clean her wound using river water and a soft drink she had on hand. The intense pain makes her condition much worse, but she still refuses to give up hope. However, in her desperate rush, she ends up making a significant error. The blood flowing from her wound splatters onto the nearby leaves. Meanwhile, those two men were still actively searching for her deep within the jungle. To conceal their crime, they go back to the exact location where Daisy's vehicle had been left. Then, taking her car, they begin to prepare a fake accident scene, hoping to make the police believe that the girl's death was merely an unfortunate accident. Meanwhile, Daisy's condition was steadily deteriorating. Her leg had become severely swollen, and with every single step, she was forced to stop and take a moment to rest. She's now beginning to feel a deep sense of regret for that decision. Had she only chosen the straight path, she would probably have arrived at her interview by this time. But at this moment, she didn't even know if she would ever make it out of this jungle alive. The exhausted Daisy begins to cry uncontrollably, but then, quite suddenly, a very loud sound erupts from above. As she looks more closely, she comprehends that her car is being pushed off the cliff to stage what appears to be an accident. Just then, she also overhears the men's voices. They are saying to each other that before the police arrive, they must locate that girl's dead body. They were absolutely certain that the injured girl couldn't possibly run this far. They feared she might have succumbed to her injuries, perhaps having bled out somewhere. But then, their eyes catch sight of fresh bloodstains on the leaves of the trees. It's at this moment they fully realize that Daisy is in fact still alive. Immediately after this discovery, they begin an intensive search for her across the entire forest. Meanwhile, Daisy herself stumbles upon a broken mobile phone, nestled among the jagged rocks, which must have fallen from her car during the crash. Its screen was completely shattered, but the phone was still operational. Seeing this, a fresh wave of hope surged into Daisy's eyes. She immediately attempted to make a call for assistance. However, in such a dense jungle, not a single network signal could be found. A frightened Daisy desperately keeps changing her position, trying to locate a signal. She even crosses the freezing cold water, making her way to the hill across from her. But every single one of her attempts proves to be completely futile. Just then, the phone's battery completely runs out, and her mobile phone abruptly switches off. At this point, Daisy was completely shattered and broken from within. After many days of relentless fatigue and overwhelming stress, her body finally gives up and she collapses, falling unconscious to the floor. When she eventually regains her senses, she discovers herself in a place that is entirely unknown to her. Her injured leg is carefully bandaged, suggesting that someone had provided her with medical treatment. Daisy slowly attempts to rise and make her way out of the room, but just then, a man suddenly enters. Upon seeing him, Daisy became absolutely terrified. She was no longer in any condition to place her trust in a complete stranger. She quickly snatched a weapon from nearby and issued a stern warning to the man not to dare attempt to approach her. Fear and a profound sense of dread had completely consumed his mind. No matter how many explanations the person standing before her offered, Daisy was now utterly unwilling to believe a single word. In a moment of sheer panic, Daisy quickly picked up a small box nearby, and without hesitation, she threw the white powder it contained directly onto the man's head. The very next moment, the man screamed out in agonizing pain. In reality, that was no ordinary powder, but an extremely dangerous chemical. The man immediately runs to the fridge, grabs milk and pours it on his head, as only that could ease the chemicals burning. Daisy couldn't grasp what she'd done in her fright. Meanwhile, Daisy's family was terribly worried, having had no contact with their daughter for days. After checking her phone's last location, they filed a police complaint. Meanwhile, local police officers were actively preparing to launch their full investigation into this particular case. When Daisy eventually regained her consciousness once more, she discovered her hands were tightly bound. However, the man who was standing directly before her no longer appeared quite as terrifying as he had previously. He then offered her some food and water, gently instructing her to eat it at her own comfortable pace. But the moment Daisy brings up the idea of calling the police, the man immediately deflects the conversation. Daisy, who has been starving for 2 whole days, finally finds herself unable to resist, and the instant the man turns his back, she starts to devour the food with great speed. Gradually, she begins to realize that perhaps this man isn't quite the person she had initially imagined him to be. In the midst of their discussion, he disclosed his given name. His name was Henry. Henry had been living all alone in that jungle for many years. Pause. He had converted an old van into his laboratory. Pause. As Daisy recounts her entire ordeal to him, Henry instantly grasped the true identity of the 2 men who had been pursuing her. At that very moment, an unexpected sound suddenly emanates from outside. Henry's expression immediately becomes gravely serious. Observing his sudden change in demeanor, Daisy instinctively realizes that the people outside must undoubtedly be those from whom she had desperately fled for her life, and indeed, standing right there outside, were those very 2 men. In fact, these were the only 3 individuals residing in that particular jungle, and they had been collaborating for a considerable number of years. Henry was responsible for preparing the merchandise, while the other 2 men handled its distribution and supply. However, on this specific occasion, their purpose for being there was not related to their usual business dealings. Instead, they had embarked on a particular mission to locate that injured young girl. Henry desperately tries to prevent them from coming inside. He makes up excuses, tries to deflect the conversation, but ultimately, they both force their way in. But to their utter astonishment, there was no one inside. Pause. The moment their attention is diverted, Henry swiftly hides Daisy's food and water, and then attempts to erase every single piece of evidence present in the room. Everything seemed so normal that those 2 men didn't suspect a thing. In fact, before they even arrived, Daisy, with her cleverness, had already managed to save herself from that situation. She mixed the chemicals present in the room with water, creating a powerful reaction that caused her ropes to burn and break apart. Then she managed to climb out through the back window. But the most surprising thing was that Daisy didn't try to run away. She knew perfectly well that she had absolutely no idea about this unfamiliar forest, and if she ventured out on her own, she could easily find herself in even greater trouble. So she hid nearby. When Henry learns this, he's quite shocked. He never expected a girl raised in the city to understand chemistry so well. Daisy also admits her mistake, explaining that she hadn't realized at first how dangerous that white powder was. That's why she had acted out of fear. She apologizes to Henry. Gradually, the conversation between the 2 of them begins to deepen. Daisy then asks him that if Henry truly wishes to help her, why doesn't he allow her to leave this place? Then Henry told her the truth. He didn't have a car, and the nearest road or even a small town was about 20 miles away from their location. Daisy's condition was absolutely not such that she could walk that far. On top of that, the jungle was so dense that she could easily lose her way. Pause. However, Henry assures her that in just a few days, his final consignment will be prepared, and then he himself will safely lead her out of there. Upon hearing this, Daisy feels a little bit of relief for the very first time. Days begin to pass, and the trust between the 2 of them steadily grows.
Daisy was now beginning to place her complete trust in him, but she still had no idea what the real game was. Then, one day, a police officer suddenly arrived there, and the entire truth began to unfold. In reality, Henry and those 2 men were actually working for that very lady officer.
She was the real boss of this entire network. Under his powerful protection, those 2 men had been preying on young, innocent girls in the jungle for many, many years. Countless innocent girls had vanished because of their heinous actions. When Daisy first entered the jungle, Matt and his accomplice were in the process of concealing a dead body. They believed Daisy had witnessed everything with her own eyes, so they desperately wanted to find and kill her, ensuring no witnesses remained. This time, the lady officer had come there for the very same reason. But Henry, at any cost, did not want her to come anywhere near the house. He was trying his absolute best to protect Daisy. The officer, left with no other option, had to return. A little while later, Matt arrives to collect the goods. As he's about to leave, he proudly displays the jacket that was given to him by the police officer. Just then, his gaze suddenly falls upon the distinct footprints left on the staircase. There, the clear impressions of two different size pairs of shoes were plainly visible. Matt immediately realizes that someone else is also present here, but he doesn't let it become obvious. He behaves as if he hasn't noticed a single thing. On the other hand, Henry has absolutely no idea that Matt has figured everything out. That night, Henry and Daisy are planning their escape from the forest. Just then, Matt suddenly bursts into the room. The situation quickly becomes extremely dangerous. Just then, Henry suddenly attempts to cleverly turn the tables. He argues that killing the girl at this moment would not be appropriate. Over the past few days, he has completely brought her under his control, and now she could potentially assist us with our objectives. To prove his point, he orders Daisy to prepare coffee for everyone present. Daisy immediately understands the hint in his eyes. She quietly pours coffee into the cups, secretly mixing in a special chemical, and pretends that everything is perfectly normal. Daisy then places the coffee cups inside the microwave. She carried out the entire task with such cunning that Matt and his companion had no suspicion whatsoever. But as soon as they sensed something was amiss, it was already far too late. Suddenly, a powerful explosion ripped through the area and the entire scene was thrown into disarray. Somehow, both of them managed to make their way out. However, Henry's back had been severely injured in the blast. Even more terrifying than that was the fact that despite being severely burned and gravely injured, Matt was still alive and had somehow managed to get out. Henry had fully understood that he was absolutely no match for Matt when it came to sheer physical strength, but he was utterly determined to save Daisy no matter what the circumstances. Gathering every last ounce of his remaining strength, he forcefully snatched the gun from Matt's hand. It felt as if everything was about to end, perhaps. But then, suddenly, two loud gunshots echoed from right behind them. These shots had come from the very same lady police officer's weapon. The moment Daisy heard those gunshots, she instantly understood that something truly terrible had just happened. Her heart completely shattered into a million pieces. But at this point, remaining there meant nothing less than certain death. She transformed her deep pain and overwhelming fear into a powerful strength and began to run away from that place. Meanwhile, the lady officer had by now fully grasped the gravity of the entire situation. However, upon his face, no indication of fear or apprehension could be discerned. His paramount concern was solely the final shipment of drugs safely secured inside his vehicle. Now, only one remaining obstacle stood in his way, and that was Daisy. So, he decided that Daisy had to be eliminated no matter what. After running for several hours and risking her life, Daisy finally manages to reach the main road. But her luck was so terrible that she encountered the very same lady officer there. Although Daisy had never seen her before, she remembered her voice clearly. When she had been hiding at Henry's house before, she'd overheard that very same officer talking to Henry. So, the instant the officer spoke to her for the first time, Daisy immediately understood she was in very serious danger. The lady officer, holding a gun, forcibly takes her away. They both eventually arrive at the edge of a river. The officer was now preparing to finalize her sinister plan. Despite Daisy's desperate pleas, the woman remained utterly cold-hearted. Daisy realized the officer intended to murder her and stage her death as a tragic drowning accident. As Daisy stepped into the water, perhaps that was her last desperate hope of escape. But the officer was already prepared for this. She instantly grabs Daisy, then brutally shoves her into the cold water. Weak and badly injured, Daisy cannot withstand her immense strength. She repeatedly struggles to free herself, but every single attempt proves completely futile. Slowly, her breath begins to give out, her strength fading. But just then, in that critical final moment, suspended between life and death, Daisy suddenly remembers that she had secretly hidden a small weapon from the lab, specifically for her own protection. She immediately pulls it out and, with every ounce of her strength, attacks that officer. It is here that this terrifying story finally starts to end. That corrupt police officer who, by using her power, supported criminals for many years, took the lives of innocent people, and had turned that entire jungle into a living hell, finally reaches her ultimate demise. Daisy finally emerges alive from that terrifying jungle. But there was no happiness visible on her face. In her eyes, only emptiness and a deep sense of shock were apparent. Everything she had witnessed and endured had completely altered her perspective forever. So friends, if you found Daisy's survival story and this movie's explanation compelling, please make sure to like this video. Do share this with all of your friends and make sure to subscribe to our channel and also press that notification bell icon.